today I want to talk about some different techniques for painting skies. I want to show you some ideas that I have for how you can do some stripes, how you can do swirly whirly lines. So I want to talk a little bit about shape. This isn't necessarily about shadow and colour, it's more about the texture of how you put the paint on. So it's more about mark making, really. So I'm going to show you some examples of that. So enjoy. So here are some further ink examples. And this was from Boattober of 2022. I think this was done with fine liner. And then all this was done with Diamine Earl Grey. But also maybe just do 1 or 2 layers of clouds and keep them quite long and thin, because it really helps give this sense of a sort of panorama. If you try and do too much, it can look a bit busy. Another example of that in ink form, what I've done is I've just dropped in some water into this area here and then tilted the book back a little bit, and that's pushed up into here and caused some of these sort of back runs. I may have even have gone in with some tissue and lifted out a little bit of that ink there. But again, this is an example of not a lot of space. It's a very small piece. It's A6. This is A6, and so I didn't want to try and do too much sort of clever cloud detail and spoil the effect. So an alternative idea of a sky is you could use like a duotone or like a contrasting colour, and obviously this is not a true representation of what's there, but it's just a simple masked off area, and this is just a lot more of a sort of graphical style. And as you can see, some of these plants here are actually bursting through the frame, as it were, that goes around the outside, and that's just another little, I guess, a little trick sort of thing, but it looks quite nice. It's a bit different. Perhaps this needs a bit more space around it, a bit more white space. It really needs to be sort of framed, actually, but better than this. It's a bit tight, but it's just another idea. Now, this has been done with ink, but yeah, it's a very effective and fun technique. So here we have an example of no sky, and I don't think it's always necessary to put a sky. I mean, it kind of goes without saying, really, but often it's really nice to try and do some pieces of art where the thing that's singing the most is the waves or the foreground, and anything you put in here can be a distraction, and that just comes from play, really. Have a go at doing something like this, where if the line work's really beautiful and you're really proud of it, just do a big sky and leave all the line work black and white, because it's quite powerful. So as always, there's a million ways to do it. There's no right or wrong way either. So the reason why I've included this in episode 5, where we're talking more about structure, is because I wanted just to highlight the idea of, again, a very minimal use of colour in the foreground and just using the sky. And this area here is reflected in the water here. It's like a sunset or maybe a sunrise. I've used a lot of watercolour in here, and it's actually become slightly grainy and a little bit perhaps oversaturated there. But I wanted to get quite an impactful image to go with this impactful colour, to try and balance some of the heavy line thicknesses in the foreground. I'm not 100% sure how successful it is. It's probably a personal thing, but it was certainly a fun exercise to do. So that's probably the most important thing. So here we have an example here of how we have some of these hard shapes, and then in the foreground maybe some softer shapes. And obviously as clouds get further away, the differentiation between their edges will become less, so they'll appear sort of harder edged as they get further back. But again, this is just that using perspective, so bigger clouds in the foreground and smaller ones as we get further back, and it helps give us that idea of a sky going away from us. So we have another example here of quite a big bonkers ink sky. And this is I think this is using the Earl Grey Diamine ink. This is very strong in terms of sort of contrast, but obviously we've got quite a contrasting foreground, so probably too strong in the sky in a way. It's really fighting with that front and back, but it's just a really nice example of how the sort of effect you can get with inks, where you're dropping water in. You can see here some of the amazing chromatography that you get with some inks, these blue edges. It's really quite crazy. It's really good fun ink. So in terms of structure, there's different ways of approaching skies. This is a sort of contrasting example where you have the ground of in this case it's the sheds in the marina, and then I decided to use quite a bold quinacridone gold, just to blast that in to give us that effect. Now, how this is done is you're literally picking up a brush that is pretty much full of ink, and you are painting in the horizon, then just going and stopping, and then going and stopping and stopping. Now, I wanted to get the effect of this sort of cross, so I have purposely bussed through the background in places. I could have done it a little bit more on this side, and I like the idea of adding some spatters because it sort of breaks the background up. Again, it's a very stylistic thing. Some people really won't like it, I get that. I'm just really trying to show you examples here that you can do some quite confident, interesting backgrounds, but don't feel you have to, stick your tongue out and be really careful and spend ages, adding little bits of paint and little bits of water. You can be quite quick and you can be quite bold and still get some really interesting effects. So here you can see an example of where I've lifted out some paint here with a tissue and with a dry brush to try and I've kind of, because of the shape of this, I've tried to create like sort of funnel effect so everything's going into the middle. So that can be a really effective technique, lifting and pulling out, pigment to try and create your clouds that way. And here you can see some further examples here where there's a background in this corner, but what I've done here is I've lifted out some of these fluffy clouds to give contrast. Now, I think there's a sort of mistake in this drawing in a sense, because what I was trying to achieve was straight lines from the rays, coming through some big clouds. So they should have really been straight lines, but it still gives the sort of vibe. And again, that's something I've tried to do here. Not the straight lines, but the sort of the ethereal morning clouds, burning off. And that's through lifting off as well. And again, another example here of that kind of idea of morning mist burning off. And here, when we're looking at structure, this is a recent demo that I did. It's on here, it's on YouTube, it's on my Patreon. And here you can see, because we've got this perspective in the street, I wanted to get something similar in the clouds. So some sort of bigger stuff here, and then we've got this cloud detail running down there as well. And that really helps you sort of take a journey through the drawing, so you maybe start here and then go up here, and then you'd look down towards these houses here, or stopping at the way the golden squirrel or whatever that is. So as you can see here, instead of I've done a wet in wet technique over here, but then when it comes to this bit, I've just splashed on and I've been quite rough and just sort of gestural and I think it's to try and break that this kind of softer area upon this side, which contrasts with this. And as we move across, we just have this quite hard edge, like the picture's just sort of stopping here with the line work. And I wanted to try and get some similar feel of the thing sort of defragmenting, and falling apart and just disappearing. So that's the reason why I did that. Again, is it successful? Well, it's maybe a personal thing, but I really enjoyed doing it. It's really fun. And I've got an example here in my sketchbook that I can look back on and go, did that work, or did it not work? What do I think now? I did that 3 months ago, and often when you come back to stuff, you'll see it very differently. So in terms of structure, this is another example of where I've used vertical and horizontal lines in the background. Now, one of the things this hasn't worked quite so well with this is because I didn't take the time to mask off all this detail. I couldn't do straight lines across and up. So it's a bit bitty because I've had to sort of paint in some areas and then do it on others, and it kind of has broken up a bit, but that doesn't necessarily matter. But I think that idea works quite well because of these sort of containers. Everything is square and quite controlled, and the whole area is very stop-start and vertical and horizontal, and then just some dry bush over there. So again, it's another variation, if you know what I mean, that's just come about simply through sort of play. So here again, in terms of structure, I mean, you really don't have to mask off an area to create a square block. Is you can, get your brush loaded up and just, literally just go swish, 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 dot, dot, dot. You really don't have to restrict yourself to, as I said before, perfectly composed little pictures, or, you don't have to go up to the edge of the page or whatever. There's different ways of doing stuff. So again, a different approach. Instead of having horizontal and vertical components, here what I've done is I've just done some horizontal stripes. Here I've mixed 2 inks, I believe, to get these different colours. Quite a fun little sketch, sort of evening, boat returning, some seagulls. And then just blocking in this kind of sky, and then the rest of the drawing. And again, that's probably, it could be a little bit heavy-handed. It might be more successful with just a square. It's a personal thing, but it's an experiment, having a play. Really fun to do. I love these geezers. There's nothing wrong with it, but it left me, it's left me a bit cold, that one. Whereas this one was a really interesting idea, where I'd block off an area, but I'm sort of masking off that area. And then within that masked area, doing some increasingly more and more sort of disrupted shapes until we end up with just some spatters here. And I think that worked really well. I think that was a really interesting technique, and I want to go back and revisit this. Genuinely basic techniques of lifting out, and then developing into more quick and speedy sort of shortcuts, to slightly more sort of advanced techniques, where you're kind of combining some of those different elements into a pair of binoculars. One of the things I would say is quite important to remember with skies is a few really simple little points. Is generally, the skies are darker at the top than they are at the bottom on the horizon. Generally, the clouds tend to get bigger as they are overhead. In other words, when you're looking directly above your head, they get bigger, but then the cloud detail tends to get smaller as it gets down to the horizon, until, clouds could just be one in front of the other and you can barely see them. So try and get that sensation of clouds getting bigger as you climb up into the sky. And I would encourage you not to do a big drawing. I would stick away from doing anything like this, where it takes time and a little bit of planning. I wouldn't do that. I would create some arbitrary sort of silhouettes or a boat or something, and I would just do lots of little ones. You don't need expensive paper. I would say just some basic watercolour paper is fine. And I would just start off, do some of these simple exercises, lift out some colour, try doing some big backgrounds, things like that. I would suggest you use a bit of ink as well. Ink is really good fun. This is my daughter's work she did this morning. Look at these figures, brilliant. Look, my dad's head, me. This is why I have to go to the hospital, because I've got wonky teeth. So that's enough from me now. Go and speak to the other bloke over there. So that wraps up my Big Daft Sky series. Let me know what else you want me to tackle. These series are really fun to do. I can be quite concise, I can compartmentalise, and I can actually really drill down into a subject, which is great. So I hope you've got my enthusiasm for skies. Bigger and dafter the better, and I hope you feel it a little bit now, or I've taken away some of the fear maybe. But yeah, you have to play, you have to experiment, and just go for it. It's only paper, nobody dies, hopefully. Although statistically, I guess painting, particularly watercolour, is something older people do. I wonder how many people have died while they're doing watercolours. Anyway, so let me know if you've enjoyed this series. Yeah, if you can't be good, be careful. See you later. Bye-bye.